So I'm going to give a short introduction and then introduce our guest, Paul Turner from Virtual America. So let's get started here. So this is the agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about our platform inCitu and what we do. And then we're going to talk about how we met Paul for the first time in Charleston. And then Paul's going to introduce the digital preservation project called the Lost Charleston Project. So inCitu is a startup based here in New York City. We bring future cities to life with augmented reality to basically create better conversations around the future of cities. When we talk about the future of cities, most of us are not architects or planners, and it's very hard to get a grip on complex projects. But if we could bring urban planning data from city halls back to the street at eye level, the way that we normally experience cities, we thought that we can have better conversations around the future, leveraging both the expert knowledge and the knowledge of the people that live in the city. And we've been doing this for 4 years now, and that has proven to be very true. And we've done lots of projects in all kinds of categories, from environmental resilience to mixed-use development to parks and placemaking to street design. So we use mobile not headsets, but mobile phones and tablet-based augmented reality. And we like that actually better because not only can you see over people's shoulders, but you can have people that don't know about a project that come up to you on the street and have this bystander effect and learn about a project together. So it can spark this group experience that I don't think you get with the private headsets. And then the experience that we usually enable is basically you'll be seeing a decal or something on the sidewalk and be able to scan it and see a project at its real scale in the context of the actual site where it's planned for. So that's how the platform works. To publish the projects is very easy. You just upload 3D model to a map, and it will create an AR project that can be viewed without having to download an app or register an account. And so once you create your project, people can load it up on site and see it in its real scale. They can see it remotely in the room, and we're going to get a chance to look at some of Paul's projects in our tabletops today. If you have your phones, you can scan the QR codes in the presentation later. And we also have web maps where you can see projects, multiple projects on one map. So we met Paul in Charleston, South Carolina, about 2 years ago. I actually met here in New York at a conference on digital cities, and we did one of our very first pilots where we were looking at permit data and how to visualize it on the street. And we also looked at some big projects that were topics of conversation in Charleston, such as what was introduced to me at the time as the seawall, which is really perimeter protection, trying to prevent against flooding, because Charleston's historic downtown is threatened by flooding. So when I thought of the seawall, I was thinking like Lord of the Rings, or Game of Thrones, like a giant wall. But when we actually got the model and put it on site, it was a little bit more modest. And so that's the type of thing that I think inCitu can do, is really bring that nuance to the conversation. But enough about us. Let's introduce Paul in Virtual America. So Paul Turner is a technologist, educator, researcher, entrepreneur based in Charleston. And Paul's worked in government, higher education, and the nonprofit sector with numerous information technology startup companies. His research, teaching, and consulting for the past 35 years focuses on intersection of emerging technologies and their impact on architecture, archaeology, art, education, and history. Bit of a Renaissance man. So without further ado, Paul, let us know, what is the Lost Charleston Project?
Okay, let me switch over to my slide deck. And let's make sure I've got
And yes, the meeting will be recorded. We'll have it on YouTube to view tomorrow or next week.
So I'm a little bit at a disadvantage because I can see everybody, but I can't see myself. But can everybody see my slides? Just nod or good.
I can see your slides loud and clear.
And hopefully see
Hear
me.
you loud and clear.
But it's more important to see my slides. So Virtual America is just a small consultancy, myself and some partners, and most importantly, students that I hire as interns from the College of Charleston here locally, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. So let's make sure. Okay, so this is me in one slide. You'll see a heavy emphasis on education, both universities that I attended, 1, 2, 3, and then universities that I worked at, from the University of Missouri, I spent considerable amount of my career at University of Notre Dame. And then for the last almost 5 years now, I've been working with students from the College of Charleston and on one of their advisory boards for a very nice program called Computing in the Arts. Just to kind of sum up what I do, I'm a researcher, I'm a technologist first and foremost, and I've been an entrepreneur starting small companies and working with startups off and on my entire career from the 80s all the way through the present day. So two things that we do with Virtual America, I kind of break it down this way. Reality capture, all of those words that you see up there, 3D LiDAR scanning, photogrammetry, photography, video. We build virtual tours with a tight focus on art, architecture, museums, and historic sites. We build, in the modern language, digital twins, 3D models of historic buildings and sites. And then I've been fascinated for at least a dozen years now with augmented reality and its applications in art, architecture, and history, historic preservation, and tourism as well. So this is where we met. So it's been exactly 2 years since I met the inCitu folks. Dana presented.
Time flies.
What's that? Yeah, time flies. It seems like it wasn't that long ago, but it's been 2 years. At the NYU Metaverse and the City Summit, I was asked by the mayor, the mayor at the time, Mayor Tecklenburg, to attend the summit and represent Charleston, and came away. The number one takeaway was that there was a lot of stuff going on that intersected my interest, but particularly what caught my eye was the work that inCitu was showing. And so Dana knows that I pretty much invited myself in to be part of the effort, and that led to this pilot. So the pilot kicked off. We were one of the first 3 cities, New York, DC, Charleston, to test inCitu's AR technology at the time. And we had some really great applications. You see the mayor of Charleston, we were in his office, and we built a building across the street without any permits or any permissions, which would be completely unheard of in Charleston. And we got the mayor to go to the window and look across the green, across the street, and lo and behold, there was a building. But from a practical standpoint, we were interested in using this technology to model the seawall. They called it the battery, the perimeter barrier, but really it's the seawall. And the goal is to build an 8.8 mile seawall around the entire peninsula of Charleston to prevent Charleston from turning into Venice. So that was one of our applications in the pilot. And here's a bunch of pictures of us running around town. That's a group of us on the front steps of City Hall. We're down at the Battery. We're down on King Street, which is the main business district of downtown, and King Street. And you see us, running around town testing out different ideas and applications. Here's some man on the street where we just put the decals down on the street and asked people to take a look. And that turned out to be, we gathered a lot of good feedback. Here we are down at the seawall. You can see the top view is the reverse view from the water of the section of the seawall that we're talking about. And you can see that the water level, this is probably low tide, it gets almost up to the top of this wall in the old version. So what they're doing with the seawall is they're actually raising it 1.5 feet, which will probably keep us good for another 10 or 20 years if we're lucky. But eventually there's going to be a bigger effort to protect downtown from flooding. We also modeled a new building. This was I think a 9-story or 10-story building that's going to be built just outside the historic district. It has to go through all of the zoning. And we actually did some live tests at one of our big tech gatherings. We had about 100 people, and people could actually stand on the site and see what the new building was going to look like directly on the site. So we took full advantage of inCitu's technologies at the time, and I think we provided some good feedback to inCitu as well. We learned a lot, and I think they did as well. So when I talk about metaverse technologies, this is what I talk about currently, and I lead with maps and mapping tech, 3D scanning and modeling, augmented and virtual reality, which in our case we're really focused on AR. And then also heavily assisted now with AI, with AI technologies. And we've kind of got this R&D process down now. We've been working on it Oh, for since last fall, pretty much in earnest. Maps, historic photos, 3D models, AI, and augmented reality. So a lot of people say, well, what is the metaverse? And that can take us off topic. But when I think of the metaverse, I'm thinking primarily as of the 3D future of the internet, which some people call the metaverse. Some people just call it the next, Internet 4 or Internet 3, whatever we want to call it. But these are the things that we think about when we're doing projects that lead to what you're going to see here. So I'm gonna look at three examples. The first example does not use AR, but could. It was originally, but it gave me a solid idea of the technologies that I needed to use for the following two projects, which do use AR. So the old brick church at Wambach Creek is really a very, very interesting building. The client is the Village Museum, which is a wonderful little local small town history museum in McClellanville, South Carolina, which is about 30 miles from where I'm sitting here in Mount Pleasant, which is just over the bridge from Charleston. It's about 40 minutes drive from downtown Charleston, McClellanville. It's a little seaside village that's been beautifully preserved and has a wonderful local history museum. And we picked this project to work on, which really turned out to be, I think, a wonderful project to illustrate the use of some of these metaverse technologies. This is a 1768 church building, beautifully preserved in its original location, original site. And you'll see it literally sits in the middle of nowhere, literally at the edge of the Francis Marion forest, which is a huge tract of forest land that's been preserved. And this church has been on the site and the graveyard untouched since 1768. And it's beautiful inside. It's never been electrified. It has no water, no electricity. You notice that the windows are open to let the building breathe. And it's just amazing when you walk into it. You cannot believe that this church has survived, since before the Revolutionary period, 1768. It was originally a Church of England, an Anglican church. And it's really quite amazing. So we worked with a group of students from a very unique university here in Charleston called the American College of the Building Arts. 300 students, only small university like it in America, modeled after one in France. And the students spent an entire semester going out on site, hand measuring the building, taking photographs. We scanned the entire site with our LiDAR gear. Took a lot of photographs, both from the ground inside and from the air. And students built a really beautiful, to-scale building model. And you can see it's really just amazingly accurate. And even modeled the inside with these old box pews. And so that was 4 students times a semester's worth of work. And they did, I think, amazing work and learned a lot in the process. So here's some LiDAR. What's cool about this building is it has a very interesting inside as well as an interesting outside. You can see in this top-down view, the LiDAR clearly shows the box pews, the old-timey, you rented one of these pews as a family, and that was partly based on your stature in society as to where you sat. The more money you had, the bigger the box pew and the closer you were to the preacher. And you can see the LiDAR. It's a very, very unusual building, beautifully architected and lovingly preserved over the last 250, 260 years. And then we built a virtual tour of the building using Matterport. I won't go through it here, but that allowed the students to consult the virtual tour back in their studio at the American College of the Building Arts while they were modeling. And that really helped inform their ability not to have to travel 40 miles or 40 minutes back and forth to the actual site. So I think they actually were on site like 3 different times, but were able to consult our virtual tour model frequently to get details to their drawings and hand measurements. The second project is one I just finished. It's called the Orangeburg Metaverse Experience. And this one came about, this started a conversation with a woman about a year ago at the South Carolina State Historic Preservation Conference, what was interesting about what she was doing, and I'll go through a couple of examples, is this just happens to be my hometown. Orangeburg is just a small town, small city, 13,000, just over 13,000 in the city limits. It's halfway between Columbia and Charleston on the interstate. It's about 75 miles from where I'm sitting, and it's about 40 miles to the state capitol. So it's not quite equidistant, but I can be from my desk into the middle of downtown Orangeburg in 80 minutes, 75 minutes, 75 miles. It has a rich history. It goes back to 1735. It was, that was considered inland at the time, 70 miles inland. It was still heavily populated by indigenous people of the area, the Edisto Indians on the Edisto River. And the local landed gentry here in Charleston wanted a buffer zone between the low country, which is what we call Charleston, and just about 50 or 60 miles inland is the low country. Orangeburg is just at the very end of the low country before you start to go up the hill, so to speak, towards to Columbia. The other thing we learned in our research is the railroad came to Orangeburg rather early. So it was an interior railroad town and an agricultural center, and it still is that way today. But it's been quite depressed compared to Charleston, which is a boom city. Orangeburg is just in that in-between zone where it's really deteriorated, especially downtown. But it has some unique features. It has 2 historically Black colleges and universities located downtown. And you'll see this at the top of the screen. South Carolina State University and Claflin. Claflin was founded in 1869. It's one of the earlier HBCUs in the South, founded right after the Civil War for Black students by the Methodist Church. It was Northerners who founded some of these historically Black colleges and universities. South Carolina State University came along in the 1890s, and they're odd for universities. They're literally side by side. They almost are on the same campus. Significantly, they're right downtown, and you'll see that they're right across the street from what's called Railroad Corner, and we'll talk about that. And then as we look at the study area, we picked this, outlined in purple, we picked this study area to look pretty deeply into from a historic preservation standpoint, and you'll see why in just a minute. So we go back and in a lot of our research, it's pretty straight historic preservation style research, and we rely a lot on historic maps. And the best ones from about 1880s forward through about the late 1950s come from a company based in New York called the Sanborn Map Company. And a lot of times people just call these the Sanborn maps or the Sanborn fire insurance maps. And they were these beautifully detailed, wonderfully detailed and accurate maps of over 12,000 towns and cities in the US and Canada. And every town pretty much of any size had a Sanborn map. Even McClellanville, as small as it was in the 1920s, had a 1-page or 2-page Sanborn map. So they, even small towns had Sanborn maps. There's Sanborn maps of every major city and every city of any or town of any size in America. And we're able to go back and look at this part of the city in 1900, and item number 3 on this map is what we call now Railroad Corner. And we'll talk about why it was called Railroad Corner. Because in 1902, they built this beautiful Victorian era train station right on this corner. And it became sort of the anchor for this part of downtown. And we'll see that a thriving business district grew up across the street. Again, this is right across the street from those colleges that we just talked about. And so it was kind of the center of activity and commerce. And the passenger trains came to Orangeburg as early as 1840, but by 1902, lots of trains running back and forth, connecting Columbia and Charleston. So you could take, numerous trains a day going north or south. And in fact, over time, you could get on the train in Orangeburg and you could go all the way without changing trains, all the way to Cincinnati on the Southern Railroad. And here's another picture of it, right there on the corner, railroad corner. There's the train station. And when we look at the Sanborn maps for this area, we see that it was, literally on the corner. You can see Southern Railway Passenger Depot. All the pink buildings are businesses. Yellow buildings in Sanborn maps are frame. The pink buildings are brick. The blue are concrete block or something similar. You can see there's filling stations and houses. It was quite well developed by the 1930s. Bicycle repair shop, moving pictures, like a silent film, screening room at the very top, which was kind of interesting. That's lost to history as well. And in 1941, for whatever reason, they decided to build a road, a big road, right through the middle of Railroad Corner and literally right through the middle of the depot. So this station lasted at Railroad Corner for almost 40 years, 1902 to 1941, and then it's lost. So it becomes a lost to history building. We didn't set out to find this building or spend so much time on it, but because it was such an interesting local history story, we ended up spending quite a bit of time in our 7-month project devoted to this part of downtown and the depot in particular. By 1958, look what's happening. The train station is gone, it's been gone. And you can see this is a hand annotated Sanborn map. People have X'd out the buildings on the corner, which means they're gone. They stayed a vacant lot until just recently. And a lot of these other buildings are gone. In fact, a lot of the buildings in this part of downtown have been wiped off the map, not only because of the road, but because of the changing economics of downtown. And this one really makes it clear. The great thing about the Orangeburg maps is they had been hand updated literally by pasting over the old 1931 maps. So we can clearly see exactly where the road came through, and it literally came through the middle of the passenger depot. And then there was a new auto dealer added in the late 40s. We can see across the street, some of these buildings are still there. And then based on this research and some really amazing work by this guy, Brad Mobley, who's also a native of Orangeburg, we built a complete set of plans for the train station based on the original blueprints that we found in the archives in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Atlanta History Center. And he went completely crazy with this project, way above and beyond what we thought about. So we now actually have the ability to go on site if we ever chose to and rebuild this station down to the last detail. Probably won't happen because it'd have to be built in the middle of the road, but we have the ability to do it if we chose to. And you'll see Brad's drawings are amazingly detailed. This is what he does and did for his career, and just a beautiful set of drawings. And then we got lucky. We have Mitchell Campbell, who's an architect, now retired but living in Charlotte. He actually built a beautiful 3D model of the train station, and including modeling the inside of the station. So of course, because we're talking about AR, now that we've got the 3D model, well, now we can go to the next step. We can take it through inCitu's AR platform, and we can make it come to life back on the original site. And so that's kind of the basis of our Lost Charleston and our R&D effort. I'll pause on this for just a minute. If you want to, each one of these ones I'm going to show going forward is going to have a code, and also you'll be able to find these on the inCituAR public map, which I'll show at the end. But if you want to try to, pop this up on your desktop, it should work fine.
Yeah, I'll give a couple quick tips. If you scan with your phone, it'll bring up the project page, and if you click See in AR, you'll be able to open your camera and grant the camera permission, and then it'll show, if you point at your desk or the floor, like a flat surface, it'll show some dots. And if you tap your finger on those dots, it will load the model in. If you need any help seeing the model, just post in the chat, and we've got our team to help. So that's it. Yep.
All right, well, I'm gonna,
Oh, sorry, Paul. One more thing. I thought it was really cool in this project because I was looking at an AR and you can move your phone inside the building and see the interior.
yeah,
So
that's right.
I
You
like
can
that.
actually, if you work your way around, you can actually go into the inside of this building. Uh, Thanks to Mitchell and his amazing work. I'm gonna go ahead and leave this. We'll show you the map at the end where you can find these. And then we actually use this same approach that hopefully some of you are trying in our exhibit, where we actually had a map of this part of the city and we had the QR code, and people could actually pop the train station up right on the railroad corner part of the map, and they could literally walk around the building using their phones. So worked out really, really well for our exhibit. Second building I'm going to go through very quickly. This is actually a bowling alley that's on the National Historic Register, and it's being preserved by a series of grants from the National Park Service, which they were getting really quite a bit of money, but that's going to come to an end. But it's part of the African American Civil Rights Program, but it's also part of the African American Civil Rights Trail, which has numerous sites in South Carolina. This happens to be one of them. Why? This was like South Carolina's version of the Greensboro lunch counter. This was a major point of contention between the students at the two historically black colleges and universities 2 blocks away from this bowling alley and the owner of the bowling alley, who would not let blacks bowl in his bowling alley. So I won't go deeper into that study. You could look it up. It has a great Wikipedia entry called the Orangeburg Massacre, and the bowling alley was the spark that lit the story in 1968, February 68, of the Orangeburg Massacre. In 2021, this is what it actually looked like. It had been closed since '07, but literally they just walked out the door, turned the keys, walked away. Pins are still in the lanes. Everything is still there. Balls are still there. Shoes are still in the rack. The bowling alley was out of business at this point almost 15 years. And somebody decided to buy it and bring it back and preserve it. So part of our project was 3D modeling what the bowling alley is going to look like when it's renovated. And we have a very nice model that shows the new front of the building and the new sign based on the historic signage from 1968. And also we started modeling the inside as well. And again, we were able to use AR using inCitu's platform to put this model down on the landscape at 1:1 scale. So you can stand outside the bowling alley and see what the renovated front and sides and eventually the interior is going to look like. This is part of a larger renovation of this entire part of downtown and the shopping center that it sits in. Circa 1962, we did a end of project exhibit at the local library. We had a great turnout. We also had students helping us from South Carolina State University on this project. So Charleston Metaverse, this is what we came to talk about. I tend to brand everything that I'm working on, both to keep straight in my own head what projects I'm working on, but I'm a big believer in branding. And so this next project, which we call Lost Charleston, is actually part of a larger multi-year project we're working on called the Charleston Metaverse. So the Lost Charleston, the premise of Lost Charleston is to recreate lost buildings that would be National Historic Register buildings today if they still existed on the landscape, using 3D modeling and augmented reality. It's based on really wonderful research by a noted historian here, Lee Jones Handel, who worked in Historic Charleston Foundation for many years. She also worked at the American College of Building Arts as their director of fundraising and marketing. And then when she retired, she started writing a whole series of books about the history of Lost Charleston, of the way Charleston used to look in the past and what it looks like today. And with Lee's help, we scoured, her research and decided to work on 5 buildings initially from her initial research. And I'm going to show 4 of them because I think each one of them kind of shows a different slice of Charleston's history over time. So the Charles Pinkney Mansion, the Bennett Rice Mill, the Thomson Auditorium, and the Charleston Union Station. So these buildings were built between 1750 and the early 1900s. The Charleston Train station was built in 1908, so they span that pretty significant period of time. And each one of these buildings has been either lost to history or significantly lost, and we'll see what we're talking about. So here's a bird's eye view of this part of downtown Charleston in the 1870s. I don't have my laser pointer, but if you look in the center at the top right, you'll see Pinkney Street. And if you look down where all of the, where the Cooper River is and all of the wharves are, you'll see Bennett's Wharf. And right along in this section of downtown are two of the first two lost buildings that we modeled. These bird's eye views are just absolutely amazing. So if you put the bird's eye views from the 1870s and 1880s, when these were created and popular, and you sort of pair them up with the early Sanborn maps from the 1880s and 1890s, 1900s, these could be a really wonderful historic resource. Here's the first one, the Charles Pinkney Mansion. Built in 1750. When it was built, it was the finest house in downtown Charleston at its time, in town, over 6,000 square feet on a 9-acre site that faced the river. So none of the buildings that you see in front of this building were there. It was like a plantation house in town. In fact, these were owned by very wealthy landowners, slave owners, who also had these amazing plantations out in the country as well. We're lucky that we have some pictures, photos, but unfortunately we don't have any photos that we've been able to find or drawings of the building when it was originally, before it was destroyed by fire. But we do have a few, including a stereo view that we found. I think my intern, Charlotte Zink, is on. She's the one that found this deep in the archives of the Library of Congress. It was absolutely a wonderful find, this particular set of stereo photos. We also found, thanks again to Charlotte, a plat map from 1866. In 1866, it was already listed as old mansion ruins. So it was already, but it was still intact up through about the 1880s when the earthquake in Charleston brought the rest of it down. And we also were lucky enough to find an original sketch of the interior by Charles Cotsworth Pinkney, who was a Revolutionary War hero and general. And then I think he was the governor and signed the Constitution. So the Pinkney family goes all the way back in Charleston history and still here today. You know, using everything that we found, we were able to model the building quite accurately. We did various versions of the model. And then if we go on site with inCitu, we're able to put it down on the landscape at its original scale and adjust its location. Luckily for us, this is unbelievably, all these years later, this is now an empty lot, which won't be an empty lot much longer, but it used to be a restaurant. They tore it down and made a parking lot. Eventually, it's going to be extremely high-priced housing built by the Marriott Corp. And you can see that it sits literally right in the center, almost in the center of the city. I'll leave this up for just a second if you want to try to pull this one up. But this one looks wonderful on location. And we're really lucky because we know exactly, thanks to maps and some work by archaeologists, every time you disturb the soil or talk about building anything new in downtown Charleston, you have to have an archaeologist come in, professional archaeologist, and they come in and do soil samples and do some digging, and they pretty much know exactly where this building was sited, thanks to all of the work that's been done, plus the maps that we have. All right, I'm going to move on. So the Bennett Rice Mill is another interesting lost building. This building was built originally in 1845 and stayed active as a rice mill through 1911 when the rice crop started to fail in South Carolina. It used to be one of our three major cash crops in South Carolina: rice, indigo, and then cotton. Rice lasted up into the early 1900s and then eventually got killed off by the hurricanes and the salt water and the economics. And 1912 to the present day, abandoned. This is what it looked like in 1934. It was still standing, pretty much intact, although pretty heavily decayed. So it'd been out of action for over 20 years at this point. Here's what it looks like today. What's left of it is just the front, just the facade. But they've gone to great lengths to preserve it because it's really a wonderful, iconic industrial, but beautifully designed industrial building from pre-Civil War. And owned by the Bennett family. They owned 3 rice mills in downtown, and the Bennett family is still quite prominent here in Charleston. That's what it looks like on the landscape. It sits right in the middle of what's called Union Pier, and this piece of land just sold for over $400 million just for the land. And this is going to be a 20-year redevelopment effort to completely redevelop the side of downtown. This is really like right downtown in Charleston. Here's what it looks like. It actually has a $2 million renovation project underway that's just designed to save what's left of the facade. And they're going to integrate it into the new designs for the urban redevelopment called Union Pier. We were really lucky here because in 1934, somebody built or designed architectural illustrations to scale of the, based on the photos that you saw from 1934, part of the Historic American Building Survey during the Depression. Without these, I mean, we could have worked from the pictures, but this allowed us to rebuild this building at extremely accurate scale and detailing. And so here's the student 3D model that was designed for Bennett Rice Mill. And again, we can put it very accurately because we know exactly where the facade is, put it back on the landscape where it exists in AR. It's right behind the Harris Teeter, which is a major grocery store chain here south of North Carolina. And again, QR code if you want to try it. But again, I'll have you'll be able to look at these on the map as well and try them out later. This one actually turned out, I think all of our buildings turned out really well, but this one particularly nicely. Turned out nicely because of the detailed architectural drawings that we had to work from. Thomson Auditorium, an interesting story, built in like 3 months in 1899 to, of all things, host the Civil War Confederate Veterans meeting. They were having all of these Confederate reunions, and somebody, Thomson, put up, I forget what it was considerable sum of money, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in 1899 to fund the building of this building. It was on city land, and it was like one and done. They built it for this reunion, and then they had a white elephant building. So eventually it became in 1907 the Charleston Museum, which was the oldest continually operating city-owned history museum in America. Still exists, the Charleston Museum. And they occupied this building for almost 70 years, just over 70 years, until the late 1970s. So it had a long life. This is a wonderful, like, colorized postcard of it in the early 1900s. So 1907, it became the museum. And you can see it has, period costume, period automobiles, kind of help us date this particular photo. We also were lucky enough, thanks to Charlotte's amazing archive research work, we found an original floor plan, not measured drawings, but this really gave us a good insight as to what the building looked like. And then we actually found this wonderful photo of what it looked like as the Thomson Auditorium. It actually had seating for 3,000 people with balconies, and apparently the acoustics were absolutely terrible. So that's one of the reasons why it never got much use as an auditorium after that one use. You can see the Sanborn map on the left from the early 1900s. It took up almost an entire city block, and it still exists today as a inner city park, a very popular park called Cannon Park on Rutledge Avenue. Really, it's really in the heart, almost in the heart of downtown Charleston. That's what it looked like in the 60s from the air. So you can see it's a really, really large building. Took up almost the entire park. And then disaster, fire, common theme in Charleston and many cities. But this was 1981, burned to the ground. Luckily, the museum had moved out to a new building in the late 70s. So it was empty, but it went fast. It was an old building and the winds were up, and it was a major, they had to really struggle hard to keep it from spreading to the surrounding historic neighborhood, but it was gone. And all that's left of it now is the front columns and the front porch. And you can see there's the park. And that's what it looks like today if you go to the park. And we're lucky enough to scan it in 3D, and we're able to use that scan in SketchUp to help us get the scale, the height, and the dimensions of the rest of the building. So we're able to put the scan in SketchUp and then model around it to get proper scale. And so here's the finished building. I think this was one of the nicest ones of the ones that we were able to model. And you can see again, it sits very nicely in AR on the landscape. Again, here's the QR code. And I'm just about at time. I'm gonna bust right through the last one real quick, which is also an interesting one. The Union Station, the Charleston Union Station, the main train station in downtown Charleston from 1908 to 1947. Also lost to fire. Sits right along the main drag, East Bay, which is just, you see the Cooper River to your right, and across the street from a set of historic buildings that have been very nicely preserved called the Old Cigar Factory. It was a downtown urban area. There used to be a train line that ran across East Bay Street right into the cigar factory. But interestingly enough, the train lines are still exactly where they were in the early 1900s. That's what it looks like today. If you cross East Bay Street, the train station was literally right at this intersection where the tracks are across the street. Still a major rail yard in downtown Charleston. This is what it looked like when it was brand new. You can see it was connected by the city trolley system. But even in 1908, I don't see a lot of autos, but I see a lot of horse-drawn carriages, hacks, like in London or in Charleston. And you can still take horse-drawn carriages today in Charleston. This is the colorized postcard from the same time, designed by a very distinguished architect named Frank Milburn from North Carolina. Interestingly enough, he also designed the Thomson Auditorium, and he may have been the architect for the Orangeburg train station, although we have no evidence of that, but there's some historical threads that may connect him to that station as well. It burned, common theme, burned in 1947. We've got all kinds of, pictures of it burned down. And the top one, you can actually see, if you look carefully, a whole bunch of people on either side, like, a big fire in downtown still drew a crowd in 1947. So a lot of people came downtown to watch the train station burn. And you can see the actual cigar factory across the street in this picture, which still exists today, including that sort of iconic smokestack. Here's the Sanborn map from when it was built. Again, these are like amazingly useful to help us site the buildings, so we know exactly where they sat. We actually found the floor plans for the interior, but unfortunately not the full set of architectural drawings. This is what the model looks like, highly accurate based on all of our research. Again, we put it down on the landscape in AR, and again, this one's fun as well. So Nick, I'm just about at time. If you want to jump in.
Wow, Paul, thanks. What an amazing
Kind of
collection of
blasted through.
projects.
Here's all the models that I have for the project in situ, and they all exist on the map.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I'm not sure if you publish those publicly, but if you
all of
download
them are publicly available.
Amazing. So if you download if you weren't able to get it to see the AR this time, you can download inCitu's app actually from the Play Store or the App Store, and go on the map to Charleston, and you'll actually see those projects, and you'll be able to look at them from the app as well. So that's really cool, and I really like to be able to look inside the interior of the train station. And also, Pavel was saying how it would be really neat to start to combine the ruins or leftover structure, real structure, with the AR to sort of fill it in, which we do have a feature in inCitu where you can do occlusion, so that if you wanted to add an historical part of a building that is no longer there, but still see the real building in a way that it'll block it realistically, you can do that with your in-situ models. So lots of ideas spurred, and there's a couple questions up in the chat, so we'll use the remaining time to ask a few questions from the chat. One of the questions was about the software you used, which I assume is mainly SketchUp. Did you use any other 3D modeling software?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see myself, but hopefully you can still hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we used AutoCAD for 2D and SketchUp Pro for the 3D. So a lot of times we're working from an AutoCAD file as a building footprint, and then we're using that accurate AutoCAD file to pop up the 3D.
And Pavel had a question and wanted to hear more about how LiDAR was assisted to model in SketchUp, like how you use the LiDAR.
So specifically, we use a LiDAR on existing structures, Thomson Auditorium in particular. So we're able to take our LiDAR Matterport camera and produce a highly accurate point cloud. And it's nice because in SketchUp, we can bring that point cloud in. And so we can actually use that to sketch over in SketchUp, believe it or not. And so that allowed us, where we didn't have, detailed elevation plans, allowed us to be highly accurate in our, not only the placement on the ground, but also the height and the scale of the rest of the building.
That's very cool. Scanning for any more questions if you have anything. What tools or applications are needed to build a 3D model for converting to AR? We talked about SketchUp and AutoCAD already for that. And we also shared in the chat, if you scroll up, some documentation on different software that works with inCitu. We are working on a SketchUp plugin in the future, so
yeah. What I told Nick, it really because I have actually worked in inCitu's platform, for almost coming up on 2 years, so I do understand it quite well. But the inCitu part is that literally takes the least amount of time and is the easiest. So once you have your 3D model in SketchUp or, any other, could be some other 3D architecture program, all you have to do is export it as a 3D model. In the case for the ones I showed today, I export them as USDZ files, and they all nicely fit under the 20 or 25 megabyte limit. And then we're able to bring those through. Sometimes you have to fiddle with them a little bit. In the case of the train station, I had to go through and do a little bit of simplification. I had to take out the trolley and some of the other models that we put in there for scale because they didn't come through, but the rest of them came through rather easily.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes just making sure the model is at the center of the 0, coordinate in SketchUp when you export is also a good idea. And you saw in Paul's maps how the orange center point of the models was at the cornerstone sort of the building, which is closest to where the viewer would be. So that's a best practice, yeah.
Something that we learned early on is I think that was recommended by inCitu, is to put the z-axis, the center of the building, not the center of the actual building, but along the corner, one of the corners.
Yeah, we had a question about oral history from Maggie, who is asking if you heard any people who had relatives that were connected to any of these projects, like the mill or the train station.
That's a very astute question, Maggie. What I say is that there's an architectural history for a building, but there's also what I call the social history. That may not be the academic term, but that's what I call it, which is who lived in the building. Do we have first-hand accounts in writing or oral histories that talk about exactly what you're saying? Like lots of people worked in those buildings. Of course, the Bennett Rice Mill, that would be a long time ago. The train station, pretty much everybody's dead that might have. In Orangeburg, you have to be older than dirt. You have to be pretty old. My dad's 96, but he didn't grow up there. I did find somebody in Orangeburg who was 88, who was born in 1936, and he distinctly remembers the train station in Orangeburg as a kid, even though it tore down when he was 6 years old. So yeah, if we had more time, more money, that would be another phase that we could go. And there may be oral histories on file that we just haven't looked for.
One of the cool things about AR is you might have multiple buildings that took place at the same site to be able to
Yeah,
see things
in the
that.
case of the Charleston Museum, lots and lots of people who grew up in Charleston have very distinct and strong memories of going through the Charleston Museum. In fact, I remember going there in the '70s, the late '70s, when it was still in business as the museum.
So, Paul, we have 5 minutes left. I want to give you a couple sort of curated questions and reflections, maybe to for other people to think about as well. We talked a bit about these digital preservation projects, and then I think your presentation answered pretty clearly, like, what does that workflow actually look like? What does the digital preservation look like? What do you think about now that they're published in this type of media? How are people going to be able to interact with them in the future? How do you see them having a life now as this once built thing that's just sitting there?
Yeah, so the next step specifically with Lost Charleston is to bring this work to a wider audience. We hope to have a exhibit at the Charleston Museum, for example, at some point, and show this to a wider audience. We obviously talk to digital preservationists. I think there's a strong future for digital preservation. We think about preserving buildings and keeping them, but we're not going to be able to save everything, and we haven't saved everything. So I think what we're doing here, when I saw inCitu's platform, it immediately started thinking about how we could use the platform to show what we've been able to show in Lost Charleston, which is not only buildings that are still here and lovingly preserved, like the church, but what about buildings that are gone, that are lost? They're an interesting part of the historical landscape, and a lot of people don't know about them.
Very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about how you got this project off the ground and considerations with grant funding, which I guess now is even more uncertain than ever. But could AR be a way to promote projects to get more funding potentially, or get more out of them?
Yeah, Nick and I talked about specifically the case of downtown Orangeburg. Downtown Orangeburg has got a 10 or 20 year building job in front of them. And so instead of thinking about, we can sit around and moan about all of our lost grant possibilities, and they're significant, not to downplay them. But I think the future of this type of work is to think about it in terms of economic redevelopment. Even in Charleston, they spent $400 million to buy Union Pier. They're going to spend $4 billion or more to renovate it. And they've already put $2 million just to preserve the facade of the Bennett Rice Mill. So in Charleston, people are really serious about their history. So even they could just knock down the Bennett Rice Mill and build over it, but people refuse to let that happen. So the Bennett Rice Mill facade's going to get saved and incorporated into the future of Union Pier in a park, much like you see the Thomson Auditorium. I would guess almost nobody that lives around Cannon Park in downtown Charleston has any idea what the history of those columns are. There's no signage. So again, that would be engaging the community and doing something around an exhibit. Same thing is going to be true in Orangeburg around the train station, is to get some sort of permanent signage with AR up on those locations so that we can, engage the public in these projects. So those are some quick thoughts as we close out. Very
cool. Yeah, I think I'll bring this webinar to a close unless there's any more last minute questions in the chat. Some good comments there, and we've posted some links to the other events we're doing this weekend. If you're in the area, we'd love to see you come by. We have a survey, and these really help us with our programming. So please, if you could take 2 minutes, fill out that survey. It's really great. We had some folks in the chat today that I actually recognize and have been doing historical work with SketchUp, with inCitu, and so it's great to see Jesse and Pavel. And I think if you're not familiar with digital preservation as a category, it's really a growing practice and community that is worldwide at this point. And so there are groups on LinkedIn for it. And I hope that if it's new to you, that you can continue to dive in and explore this, and that we can keep in touch as well and share our projects with each other, and maybe what Pavel's doing in Seattle and what Jesse's doing in Maine, right? Or in Atlanta, I forget. Maine, right? And
Maine's right.
just, yeah, keep in touch. Yeah, because I think we could all help each other out and make some really cool projects this year. So
I put my email address in the chat. I should have put it on the slides, but certainly feel free to reach out if you're interested in this work and if there's anything I can do to help you with local projects.
and we have a Slack group for our user community on for inCitu. That's on our website and the emails you get it when you sign up. So that's another place we could talk to each other. And then before we go, check out our augmented reality public engagement guide. We have this was produced from our experiences in Charleston and other projects, and all the insights we gained from how to take those AR projects and actually turn them into amazing events that really engage people and create those amazing conversations. So give that a peek on our website. And once again, thank you, Paul, for your time today. Amazing presentation. Thanks everyone for showing up.
Well, we never knew that's where we would end up when we started this engagement with inCitu, but I think we're just getting started now. We've really got a nice base of examples to work from.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, and have a great weekend. Get out there. It's a beautiful weather over here. I hope it is where you are too. Take care.
All right.